You first. Need a nice hero shot of me coming down the ladder. So, you first. What do you see? What is it?
Resident Evil 7 is a first-person survival horror experience that centers around Ethan Winters as he tries to rescue his wife Mia from a murderous family in their run-down home in Louisiana. Atmosphere. The game's atmosphere is of vulgarity and unpleasantness, with the Baker house reduced to an abandoned wreck of derelict and disused homewares. There's a lot of suspense at the start of the game with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre-style house and found footage flashbacks. The slow and electrifying introduction to the dark and seemingly empty Baker house is very ominous, but the initial creepiness sadly tapers off as the game progresses. In my opinion, the lack of music throughout the game is what hurts the meandering gameplay the most. The eerie silence fades away after a while of walking around the house and solving item puzzles. There aren't that many enemy interactions to keep you on your toes either, and there's often just long periods of walking around the house with no threats to be concerned about. The atmosphere doesn't really make a return until Evelyn's bedroom, where it leaves a big mark on what is definitely the spookiest part of the game, before once again disappearing for the rest of the experience. The lack of music and long amounts of time you spend walking around the house and solving puzzles leaves the atmosphere being present for only a few small parts of the game. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. The game has several frightening moments in both scripted events and the organic interactions the player will have with Jack and Marguerite as they wander around the house, but it depends how often you bump into them. Jack and Marguerite are only in the game for the amount of time you spend in their section of the house, and Jack especially will just disappear for large periods of time, leaving you on your own.
Heck of a thing, ain't it? Sure shit beats the hell out of dying. My little girl has given us a gift. And this gift is...
The few enemy interactions in the game are quite nicely set up, with enemies waiting around corners for you to walk into, or just crawling into a room through holes in the walls. It puts the player into a state of panic, having to suddenly shoot something that wasn't there before. However, thanks to the first-person perspective, the combat is a lot easier, with headshots being very easy to make, which compensates for how narrow a lot of the hallways are. The scripted events are quite nicely executed, with things like the doll grabbing Ethan's arm in Lucas's section, or the spooky interactions with Evelyn on the boat. Beyond this and the boss fights, there's not a lot of frightening moments in the game to combat the large periods of walking around and solving puzzles that's been in all of the classically styled Resident Evil games. Combat isn't as frightening or as threatening as it used to be with regular enemies, thanks to the increased aim in first-person gunplay, and only when the ammunition is low is there anything to worry about. The game puts on an impressive front, but it doesn't keep it going throughout the entire experience. That's still no Harry Masons. sound design. Besides the save theme and the intro cutscene, most of the game's music is extremely subdued, if present at all, and there are large portions of the game where you're left in an eerie silence, which, as I've said before, hurts the atmosphere. The game's sound design and sound space work together really well. The reverb is accurate and sound effects for things are near enough perfect and fit in perfectly with the environments they're in. The voice acting is really great, with Jack and Marguerite sounding totally psychotic and Lucas fitting in well too. Ethan is probably the least inspiring bit of voice acting, but this seems to be an accurate portrayal of how he is as a character. In my honest opinion, the lack of music for the large portion of the game hurts it more than anything else, and it's an extreme shame that he decided to play it so little. But other than that, the sound design is generally very, very good. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. There's quite the amount of gore in the game, with dismemberment being something that happens quite frequently, but for most of the regular enemies the gore is done without blood. It is still quite cool to see the black liquid monsters blowing up, but for me at least it's not as gory because of this design choice. It just doesn't feel the same. On the other hand, the Marguerite boss fight is frankly disgusting but fits in with the game's overall theme. Some of the more traditional gore is quite intense, but sometimes pushes the level of realism right off the scale, with a scene of Ethan reattaching his leg with the default medical fluid, which I didn't manage to record. At least his hand is stapled on, but that's not a great deal better. Ultimately, the gore is incredibly visceral and viral, and exactly what you expect from the game's theme and scenery. That's 2 Harry Masons.
Ethan. You were right. I did lie to you. I shouldn't have, but all I can say is that if you get this, stay away.
Story. The story follows Ethan Winters, who receives a message from his wife, Mia, that says not to come looking for her. Mia disappeared a long time ago, and this message sparks Ethan's interest in coming to find her. Once he arrives, he finds himself ensnared in the twisted goings-on in the family house. There's quite a lot of interesting environmental storytelling and ominous diary entries from the start of the game that won't make a lot of sense until near the end, and the plot twists make a lot of what's happened click into place. Some of the twists are better than others, but there's some quite impressive and emotional plot points that are compelling without becoming tiring and convoluted like some of the more recent Resident Evil stories tend to. It does feel like certain things aren't resolved by the end of the game, and some of the flashbacks and sidetracks lend more to the story than others, and vary from genuinely excellent to boring and needless. There's a large sidetrack near the end of the game that feels like padding, but it isn't enough to hurt the game's more unique moments, making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Resident Evil 7 is a return to form for the series with a fresh new perspective on it, but it still hangs on to the past a lot whilst feeling lacking in other places. Next time I'll have a new review of a game called Iron Lung. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel on Patreon and get access to some sporadically released reviews including Sweet 776, and I'm still working on Rule of Rose for Patreon supporters only, they'll also get access to some of the early Halloween videos too. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion on horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I never joined the family, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Don't always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.